Power up. Get over here!
Hello, everybody out there on YouTube. We are the middle-aged guys, and we bullshit about nothing. I am the Reverend.
The theme here.
Mouse 1.
And this particular video is going to start out our Geek Week in Review. It's actually a little postponed. The timing is a little off because I didn't know it actually happened during the unofficial release of the Nintendo 64. But on September 26, 1986, in Japan, on the Famicom, the first release of Castlevania, which was Akumajo Dracula, which roughly translates to Dracula's Devil's Castle, was released on the Famicom, and it was published out by Konami when they still had spines and legs. It's set up, I think, more than anything for the NES and also for many games to come. It's set up what action platforming could actually be and what it would mean to the industry as a whole. All the way back then. Yeah, I know that there were other things around like Pitfall and other things, but nothing was quite as deep or as iconic where, you know, after 30 years, there's been over 38 games released connected to Castlevania, stemming all platforms from the NES, the Famicom, all the way up, even mobile and pachinko games. Not that we're going to talk about that in this particular video, but what we're going to do is that we're pretty much going to go ahead and go over our thoughts and our memories of really growing up with Castlevania. If we are middle-aged guys, this game has been around pretty much for 30 years, and for a lot of our gaming existence, this has been a part of it. In which case, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to open up the floor. Guys, when you think of Castlevania, what comes to mind right off the bat?
Dracula.
You with a whip. Bad demons. Bad vampires. Bad.
Simon Belmont was not like that.
Bad demons.
Well, you know what's funny is that as far as that goes, whenever I was thinking about...
Let's whip it, right?
If I sit there and I think about, like, Dracula and most other games and everything, it's really interesting that they decided to go ahead and give Simon Belmont, the first Belmont protagonist for the Castlevania series, a whip.
Right.
It doesn't, especially up until that point, it didn't sound or look like anything that fit the normal the genre conventions of what somebody would use to go after vampires.
No.
I can picture the cross. I could picture knives and swords. Yeah. I could picture wooden stakes. Yeah. Garlic. Yeah, but a whip.
Correct that whip. No. but I don't think it would have worked on the NES with a knife or a cross, or unless you were just throwing them forever. And we've already had games like that.
Yeah. And thankfully, when Castlevania was released and they gave Simon a whip, it wasn't some weapon with like a microscopic range where it looked like you were trying to, you know, attack Dracula with a penknife or something like that.
That would have been, if Castlevania was on the Atari, then that would have been that.
The whip would have been a dot, just like on
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yep. It would have been a dot.
Yep.
It couldn't even form a straight line. They just had to have a dot away from you when you did on Raiders of the Lost Ark. But look, Castlevania is one of those games that defined the NES and defined NES hard. Because there are certain times where I wanted to jettison my NES. Controllers and all, just somewhere around the room or out the fucking window because of how hard the Castlevania series was on the NES alone. Then you have later on, you know, when the transitioning to 32-bit and the Symphony of the Night. Yeah, you have the Castlevanias on the Super Nintendo and on the Sega Genesis. You know, with Castlevania Bloodlines and Super Castlevania 4 and oh, God. But Symphony of the Night, that's when it just transition to Metroidvania. And then the rest is just damn. And then we've had its downfalls. But Gray Mouse, I want you to get some input.
Well, Castlevania was one of those games that, especially the first one of those games that you just wanted to throw your damn controller at the ground and spike it like a football.
Only at the ground?
Well, I was gonna say TV, but it was.
Look, wait, come on. There are times. Look, I've witnessed someone bite controllers because of this fucking game. Someone actually was so frustrated that they bit their controller on the first Castlevania.
That's a lot of frustration.
Look,
I mean,
yeah, because he couldn't get past the Medusa heads.
Well, the thing that makes Castlevania, the first one, unique is the mechanic. When you get hit, you go the opposite way you get hit.
That was something that I was going to point out. It had that fucking get hit, bounce back bullshit.
Yeah, it was. So whatever way.
The funny thing about that, as far as that mechanic goes, I think that's one of the
most iconic things about the NES itself with certain fucking games. Ninja Gaiden had that bullshit. and lo and behold, there's a fucking pit behind you.
Yep.
No matter how much energon that you had, you fell to your fucking death. Regardless if it was just one fucking hit, you just fall. And it's like, fuck. And it's all because you get hit and you go backwards. Fuck. Super Mario Brothers was the prime example of getting hit and you being invincible for a little while and going forward. You can at least go forward. But most games, you get hit, you bounce back somehow. Even Sonic had that shit.
Well, I can see the recoil and the logic behind that physics and everything. The problem with Castlevania, as far as what happened with that, was that it led to a lot of one-hit kills, unintentional one-hit kills, really cheap deaths.
Cheap shit. Yeah.
And I think, one of the reasons why a lot of people actually start appreciating the games as a whole a lot more, especially after Dracula X on the Super Nintendo, and then going into, Rondo of the Moonlight on, I believe, the PC Engine and PC Engine CD, and then also into Castlevania Symphony of the Night, was that all of a sudden they created a world where it was like, okay, falling down doesn't mean certain death.
Well,
and that's the biggest difference in the evolution of the series, really.
That's
one
true.
Of the biggest.
That's true.
Especially when it comes to the 2D games. But go ahead, Grey Mouse.
No, I was just going to say one thing, too, is that for Castlevania, the first one, is notorious for difficulty spikes.
Yep.
The first couple of stages is good, but when you start getting the latter stages, like we had the stage with the Grim Reaper and the stage when you're fighting the mummies and stuff at the end, those stages, I mean, it's just like it goes from hard to just erection.
It was just like, fuck you. You're not going to pass this game unless you have a certain degree of skill involved.
Yeah. Which is actually another thing which causes the early games to be so endeared by a lot of fans. Because the truth of the matter is that, the problem with this game, biggest problem with this game, is not the one-hit deaths.
It's
not the fact that you fly backwards when you get hit, and that it drops you into a pit. It's that there's no fucking way to continue on this thing.
No!
There is no save system.
Yeah, there was no save system. You lost your lives, and that was it. And it's like, fuck, man. For a game that this degree of difficulty, damn it, give us some unlimited continues. You just can't expect us to just run fucking through it.
And it was one of those things where it was like, it was one of the things that a lot of middle-aged gamers in their early infancy of gaming had to deal with. It's the reason why guys like myself, The Theme, Gray Mouse would end up leaving their Nintendos on for overnight to go ahead and get back to. In fact, I believe one of the earliest secrets, Easter eggs of Nintendo Power was showing people that if you sat there and I believe hit left and A when you hit start, it would allow you to continue if you lost all your lives.
Didn't know that until later.
Yeah, nobody knew that at the launch of the game.
So we would just start all over, especially if you got to a point where it's like you got past something maybe by sheer luck.
Well, back in those days, we didn't like fighting the Grim Reaper. It's a necessity to have the damn boomerang. If you don't have that, the boomerang and the three, the throw three
item, yeah,
you're done there. It's really the difficulty just spikes if you don't have that. With the boomerang, it's easier, but it's still difficult. That's one of the. I think that's one of the defining games that started the Nintendo hard.
Yeah, yeah.
It was insane.
Although I got to say that this is not the most difficult one in the NES series. But before we jump into that, we have to mention Simon's Quest, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest.
Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest.
The funny thing is that a lot of folks go out of their way and they're like, so where the hell did this come from? Well, in Japan, on the MSX, there's actually a second Castlevania game called The Vampire Killer that was done in the vein of Simon's Quest. What they pretty much did is that they reworked it before they re-released it out here, and this was pretty much Vampire Killer. The whole pseudo RPG elements, the ability to continue and actually use a password for progress was great. And this actually laid the foundation of very early mechanics for what Castlevania would end up in the future.
Yeah.
Now, that isn't to say that the NES games weren't before we step over to Dracula's Curse, guys, what did you think about Simon's Quest?
I got something to say. Actually, on the back of the box, it says Castlevania was a cakewalk compared to this bloody quest. Or, I'm sorry, bloody curse. That's what it says on the back of the box.
That's because on Castlevania 2, look, there was a lot of confusing things about Castlevania 2.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just couldn't just figure out on their own.
Well, this right here is actually one of the poster children for bad English translations that were prevalent in North America. Because generally speaking, what a lot of publishers sat there and thought was like, these are for little kids. They don't want to read. So they didn't care at all about translating the actual dialogue or any of the hints correctly for you to be able to make it through the game. It's really, really sad. This is, like I said, one of the poster boys. And it predates, G-Wing by almost almost 10 years. So, yeah.
I mean, one thing that I really disliked about this game was the fact that it kind of disrupts the game when a horrible night for a curse. It completely stops you, and then that stupid little text comes up on the screen saying, "What a horrible night for a curse," and it was aggravating.
It's actually, if you think about it, it's actually a kind of a very forward-thinking, before its time mechanic of actually involving time passing within the gameplay and making that influence the actual game mechanic itself. But yeah, the way it was implemented was definitely very jarring.
One thing too is that some of the most iconic Castlevania music started after that. Bloody Tears is one of the. It's great. That's one of the best. I think my personal favorite. It's at the end of my videos all the time.
Yep.
But
But let's put Simon's Quest aside for now, because if you really want to learn about Simon's Quest, just look up the first episode of Angry Video Game Nerd. He goes all into that. Okay. But as far as the NES games go, this is by far the hardest.
Yes,
of the
it
three.
is, man. Oh God, you talk about leaving your NES on all night. For this, I had to, and I oh my God, I've gotten in so much trouble spiking my fucking controller and literally tossing it, and I'm just like, frustration just set in for this fucking game because once again it was getting hit while going backwards and falling to my death, and it's like, come on, man, fuck.
The one thing that I have to say about Dracula's Curse, aside from the difficulty, was that it was the first game that went out of its way and said, "Hey,
Characters?
yeah, well, not just switch characters, but somebody other than a Belmont
Yeah.
can be a hero in this."
Plus, you can pick your path
Yeah,
as well.
And it's like choose your own adventure, more or less.
because you had Trevor as the first guy that you use, and then you find Sifa, then you find Alucard, and then also what's the name of the thief?
Oh,
Brent, the thief, I believe. Yeah, you find the thief and everything else, who you end up kind of running into again in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is actually a really cool callback to that. But yeah, the variety of gameplay and everything else that you could use, especially in the later levels, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why that game is so effing hard, is the fact that because of the variety of characters that you have, especially in the later levels, you can play through stages in different ways, in multiple different ways.
well, there are certain ways that you had no choice in order to, okay, like Alucard, yeah, I would turn into that bat and waste my hearts and try to fly through certain situations.
Yep. But let's continue on. I don't think I've got a lot of games in front of me. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them with the time that we have left. But yeah, this pretty much, if it wasn't obvious by the time that Dracula's Curse came out that Castlevania was a mainstay series that gamers were going to pay attention to and flock to on a regular basis, if it wasn't apparent by the end of Castlevania, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, the move to 16-bit continued to impress people. Castlevania Bloodlines, Super Castlevania 4, which was one of the first games that Nintendo themselves, they were glad that came out.
This was the Super Famicom version of Super Castlevania 4.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, then there's also they had it for the Game Boy, Castlevania Adventure. And I believe there's also a Castlevania Adventure 2, which I don't have, and I hate myself for it because that's going to bug me at night, and I'll be scouring eBay for it. Okay, but yeah, the Castlevania games, I'd have to say there are a few series that have popped up that show up as regular mainstays on consoles that demonstrate, okay, if you want to know what a console can do, if you want to know what a good type of experience on this console, Castlevania has been one of them. Like I said, it's been around for 30 years now.
Or a bad type.
For instance.
Yes, I have this thing. And, God, I didn't get the second one for the 64. Fuck a bunch of that. This, man, you okay, look. It's funny how you had all the Castlevanias that the Reverend had mentioned, and then up to this one. This one, it's like, fuck, dude. They tried to make it in 3D. They tried to make a 3D standard of Castlevania. They tried to take the Mario and the Zelda situation. Oh, wait, maybe we can revolutionize 3D with Castlevania as well. And next thing you know, this shit came out, and it was a big load of hot, wet garbage. Fuck. People got a 64 because they were like, oh my God, imagine Castlevania on it.
Yeah, that imagination turned into a nightmare pretty quick.
What a horrible night to have a curse.
Indeed. But just like with the Nintendo 64, one of the things that that Nintendo was glad to have around was the Game Boys. You go ahead and buttress them during the time, like the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube. In which case, I got to say, some of the best versions of Castlevania, by and large. Well, actually, you know what? Let's take a step back, because before the Nintendo 64 version happened, this happened. Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Which is most people will acclaim that to be the best Castlevania.
I disagree, but we'll get to that at the end of the video why I disagree. But yeah, when Sony was in the midst of banning every 2D fucking game in existence from being on the PlayStation, in 1996, a week after Final Fantasy VII was released, this came out. And this right here, after this came out, all of a sudden Sony was okay with 2D again.
Wasn't that 97? When Final Fantasy VII was released?
Oh, 97, yes. 1997, okay? But a week later, this came out. And you know what? As far as a lot of Game of the Years, many of the magazines were split between this and Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
That year. You know, beautiful 2D sprites. Actually, what's funny is that a lot of the background for this particular game, not only did it show up on here, but also showed up on the Saturn. But a lot of the assets and a lot of things that they built on this game, as far as 2D sprites and game mechanics and everything else, was originally meant to go to the Sega 32X. But that
whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that project got canceled and it ended up turning into Castlevania.
Oh, the Sega 32X only has like 10 games on it.
Yeah, pretty much. But let's continue on before we get into more of the dark ages of Castlevania in 3D.
There's more?
Yes, there is. Let's see here. Game Boy. If there's one thing, look, I have a lot of friends, and I know a lot of people who say that they can't do portable gaming. All right, in which case I gotta say that's too bad for you because you're missing out on a lot. Okay, some of the best Castlevania games are on the portable systems. For instance, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, the first one to show up on the Game Boy Advance. This one actually is very underappreciated. The reason why is that when this first came out, it's very, very dark. But when it first came out, remember, the Game Boy Advance did not have a backlight. And it was really, really hard to play this unless you were in a really well-lit room.
You see, that was the thing about it. I remember a friend of mine, when he bought the GBA SP, he storms into the house. He didn't say a word. He dumps his Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games out, and he's looking, and he's searching. And, you know, motherfuckers are like, what is he searching for? And I thought about it for a second. I was like, I know what he's looking for. And he grabs fucking Circle of the Moon, and he does the Zelda thing when he fucking got it. Rips the GBA SP box open, and he fucking puts that game in there, and he turns that shit on, and he's like, I can see! Yes! And then he just started playing.
Yep.
I was just like, okay.
Which, actually, the funny thing is that the next GBA game, which is Harmony of Dissonance, this is when Koji Igarashi came back to actually handling the Castlevania series full time as the main producer. And you can see that they took the whole in the dark thing very, very seriously. Reason being is that if you've ever played Harmony of Dissonance, I think it's Leon, the Belmont that's in here. He is glowing the whole time. You cannot lose track of the guy. Okay? He is literally glowing the whole time. Now, the third game that was followed up on the GBA that I think is actually one of my favorite ones, which is also another very far departure from the Belmonts, is Aria of Sorrow. This one saw the appearance of Soma as the main character here. And the big thing about Castlevania Aria of Sorrow is that they introduced this soul collecting mechanic where all the monsters that you run into, you can collect their souls. And instead of sub-weapons, they gave you powers to be able to go ahead and use while you're playing. This one is great. This is probably my favorite one out of all the GBA games. Okay. Before we go further into DS games, guys, any thoughts on these? Really quick. Gray Mouse, actually, you haven't talked a lot. I'm sorry. We've been monopolizing the time.
No, it's good. I think the thing that the thing said was one of the major problems of the Game Boy Advance was that you couldn't see.
At least in the first iteration, yeah.
Yeah.
And I have all three of the Game Boy Advance games that you just said. It's hard to see. But, I mean, I've been a Castlevania fan since the get-go. But, yeah, I mean, I think some of the Game Boy Advance games, I think those are the ones that are less talked about, lesser known.
But they're great. All of them are great.
They're some of the great games. So, definitely, if you have the means, I highly recommend you pick up the Game Boy Advance games.
Yep.
Didn't Dracula X go on the PSP?
Yes. That's part of the, let's see here, the Dracula X Chronicles right there.
Mm-hmm.
They actually remade Dracula X. They replaced the 2D sprites with 3D environment and everything else. So it's a pseudo 2.5D type animation and everything else. But the cool thing about Dracula X, well, maybe not so cool thing, is that it also includes a version of Castlevania Symphony of the Night where they redo a lot of the voice acting and they redo some of the animations for some of the characters. Unfortunately, if you're a purist and you remember playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night, some of the voice actor choices that they used here kind of jarring, kind of offsetting. So, all right. Continuing on with the better portable versions of Castlevania. Soon after, when Nintendo moved on to the DS, thankfully Castlevania moved on with it. And one of the first ones that came out was Castlevania Portrait of the Ruin.
Oh.
Okay. This one right here is a great game. You have the two-character mechanic. Both the characters play very differently. It harkens back to Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. The cool thing about this is that there are literally 4 different playthroughs because of the other characters that you can unlock and play through the game as. You can unlock some of the sisters who act as a boss. I believe one of the other Belmonts, and then also I think the Axe Knight armor or something like that. Really, really fun. Okay. The second one that they followed up with is Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, which I got to say, out of all the 2D Castlevanias, I think is the best one. And we'll get into that debate, though, in a few minutes. But this one, it expanded on everything that Aria of Sorrow gave you. And Jesus Christ, it is very, very deep and very, very beautiful as far as all the things that they went toward. Now, they changed the art direction up on this one. It wasn't Yamane Michiru who was doing the main art design and everything like that, who was pretty much a mainstay for almost all of the Castlevania games that were under Igarashi. This one was great also. The next one that followed up with that was Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. Again, another departure away from the Belmonts as far as main character, but also a great game. I'd have to say that this is probably my second or third favorite one. So, but also a great game. At some point, though, when you figure things out and you've got enough of those runes, which is really similar to how Aria of Sorrow or the Dawn of Sorrow games played out, and you have the right abilities, some parts can be extremely easy. All right. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't Castlevania games on other systems, because the truth of the matter is that I've got the 3D Castlevanias right here. And the problem with the 3D Castlevanias is that, okay, the Lords of Shadow games are a complete departure, and I don't know if they're going to make any more Castlevanias after this series. Because unfortunately, Konami has a very, very bad habit of dropping series if they don't do too well. And the second one, Lords of Shadow, didn't do all that well. All right.
Like Konami still making games.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness on the PS2, these two particular games were overseen by Koji Igarashi, but there's just something off on these games. They don't have quite the same polish as the other Castlevanias in 2D that you would normally expect. They're good games. They're good 3D exploration games. They're just not quite the same Castlevania experience that you might think of. And of course, on the Wii, there's Castlevania Judgment, which is a fighting game using waggle controls. Well, you could, unless you're using the classic controller, but yeah, this one, I don't know what the hell they were thinking about with this. So I'll just...
They were thinking about branching out, trying something new. Maybe it could spark.
Maybe it could spark a new part of the franchise, but it just didn't catch on as well as it wasn't executed as well as people would have hoped it to. So.
In my opinion, I think the best Castlevania was this one. It to me, it was all about the control.
You know what's funny is that I think there's like three phases of Castlevania that we can really plot out. There's pre Symphony of the Night, where it's purely action platforming games. Okay, you move stage by stage, no backtracking, no nothing. Mm-hmm. You just go through it. And then after Symphony of the Night, it's the midst and the perfection and evolution of Metroidvania.
Yeah.
Go through the stages, go through a huge interconnected map. You can backtrack and you can get to other areas that you weren't able to get to before after you get new abilities and everything else. And that's really what a lot of people think of when they think of Castlevania now. Yeah. And then there's the 3D versions, including some games that Igarashi had apologized for.
What?
Yeah. And these particular games here, there's the thing that I think is hurts them is that they kind of fall in between of a lot of things. They're not so much action where they qualify for something like Devil May Cry, but they're not so much exploration where they qualify for something like Tomb Raider. So it's just really, really weird where they're kind of mediocre at both. So it really leaves a weird space. And then the Lords of Shadow collection, they kind of tried to reboot the whole thing, and it just doesn't work.
See, freaking, this is basically a remake of this.
Yep.
Super Castlevania 4 was basically a remake of the first Castlevania, but it was the way you could whip in all directions. I fell in fucking love with that.
Yep.
It's not like it made the game any easier, like you can triumph that shit in a matter of minutes, but I loved the control on it. I was just like, fuck. Yes, the Metroidvanias, yes, they're great for the GBA and the DS, but for me, it was just Super Castlevania. In my opinion, that was the one that stuck out to me the most.
What about you, Grey Mouse? What would you say is your favorite one out of the ones that you've played?
I'm torn between Dracula's Curse and Symphony of the Night. The Symphony of the Night, I thought, at the beginning you're all powerful, and then when you get so far, the Grim Reaper comes there and strips you of everything.
Yep.
And you become really helpless.
Oh.
And Dracula's Curse, like you said, I like the idea of choosing your own adventure, going up or down. You can actually make things easier on yourself, easier or harder on yourself, depending on what character you pick and what direction you go. But hands down, I would say Symphony of the Night is one of my favorites, simply because what got me engrossed into that was the atmosphere, and the soundtrack is just one of the best soundtracks for that game, I think, or for Castlevania in general.
Yeah. I think it actually before Symphony of the Night, Rondo of the Moon was the one that really started out where it was like, this is Castlevania as an orchestra as far as soundtrack. For me, my personal favorites out of all of them, I'm really, really big on the Metroidvania ones, and Dawn of Sorrow. I mean, I was driven to play through that game and complete it 3 fucking times in a row to get everything on that game. There's very few games that actually drives me to do that. Aside from that, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is probably my second favorite one. And then following shortly after Castlevania Symphony of the Night is Order of Ecclesia. My biggest problem with Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and I really didn't think about it until I heard the comment made on it, but it is very, very easy in comparison to the other Castlevanias. I mean, even in comparison
once you get used to everything, yeah.
Look, there's one thing about Castlevania Symphony of the Night that I can say right now that anybody has played and they know exactly what I mean. Once you get it, it changes the whole game. The Chrysogram. Everything is easy after you get that weapon.
Well, I mean, with that, the Symphony of the Night, the way it flips the castle towards the end,
yeah,
and to get 102%, it really gets tedious once you have to go into each room and get all the items to get that 102%. A lot of people haven't got that.
Exactly. But you see, the past games like this or this, just straight through, I think it's more of a challenge. And I gravitate toward that more. And that's why I say this is my favorite. It's like, fuck. Like the Reverend just said, Symphony of the Night, yeah, it can get a little bit too easy. I love the Metroidvanias, but running through Dracula's Curse and Super Castlevania 4 to just play those and to just actually complete them. And at the end, you're just like, yeah, I beat that shit.
Yep.
I got that feeling once I beat those. I was like, fuck, yes, I beat that shit. And the other Castlevanias didn't get that from me. They're great, except Castlevania 64. But, yeah, that's why I have, in my opinion, Super Castlevania 4 takes it for me.
Definitely. And, if you've got this many games in a series and you've stuck with it long enough, there are bound to be some that you like more, some that you don't like as much. And I'd have to say with Castlevania, even though there are some sneakers in there, great series overall. We've been waiting for it, guys. It's 30. So let's raise a cup. 30. It's a middle-aged game.
Yes.
Middle-aged guys. Cheers.
Cheers to Castlevania.
Like I say at the end of every video, if you're so kind, hit like, hit subscribe, leave us a comment below. We are the Middle-Aged Guys. I am the Reverend.
The theme here.
Gray Mouse 1.
Once again, for the benefits of common sense logic and gaming, happy birthday, happy anniversary to Castlevania. Oh, so many memories. Hard and easy. Great games, except for 64. Credits.
We are the 3 middle-aged games, and this week we're going to talk about the assholes who play us.
Do 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 do.